All right, so today we're going to be starting with the Progressive Era, and the Progressive Era was all about fixing the problems created by the Gilded Age. Now, we didn't spend a whole lot of time on the Gilded Age because, as I had told you guys, it's not necessarily my favorite topic. However, the Gilded Age, what you had looked at were a lot of problems that were created really post Reconstruction. You have urbanization, you have immigration issues, you have problems with monopolies and businesses and things like that. And what the progressive era is going to try to do is to basically fix those problems. The reason that it was called the Gilded Age was because the idea with the Gilded Age, and it comes from this Mark Twain book, was that the cities looked like they were painted in gold, right? Because it's post Reconstruction and kind of in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, where cities are starting to grow, people are moving to the cities, they're getting jobs, and everything looks great. But once you pull it back underneath that gold, you see a lot of rot and a lot of destruction. And that's really what the progressives wanted to do, was that they saw all these problems that existed in American society, and they wanted a way to improve the human condition. And last week, when I had you guys write about a problem that you saw in the world, a lot of you guys wrote about pollution, a lot wrote about racism, wrote about problems with schools. Again, a lot of I would say a lot of what you guys wrote about were environmental issues, but there's a lot of problems that exist throughout the world, and we're all just trying to fix them, right? It's why we vote in elections, is we're voting for someone that we think is going to be able to fix the problem. And that's exactly what the progressives want to do. They see all those issues happening with the Gilded Age, the monopolies, the fact that workers aren't being paid really well, the fact that people are living in these really god-awful homes, the fact that immigrants are being treated very poorly, and they want to find a way to fix those and make them better. And really what the progressives believed was that it was the government's job to step in and basically help with the issues. That at this point it became very clear that individuals were not going to be the ones to do it. And so it was going to be government's job to start creating laws to make things a whole lot better. And progressives were usually urban, middle class Americans. So urban meaning that they likely live in cities, and middle class meaning that they're not too rich, they're not too poor, they're pretty much right there in the middle. And the first kind of progressive era movement that we are going to talk about is, if I can get there, definitely one of my favorites, and that is the fight for women's suffrage. Suffrage being the right to vote. So when we're looking at the progressive era, we're talking about the late 1800s, early 1900s. And with the 15th Amendment, we know that all men are going to get the right to vote, but the group that's going to be left out of that is going to be the women. And the women really, for a total of probably a good 72 years, are going to be fighting for the right to vote and gaining some type of national amendment that's going to exist. So in order to understand the fight for women's suffrage, again, we kind of have to go back to who the progressives were. So the fight for women's suffrage was really made up of mostly urban middle-class women. So again, these were women who weren't really rich, weren't really poor. They pretty much lived very comfortably. And in 1848, they're going to get together at what becomes known as the Seneca Falls Convention. Elizabeth Cady Stanton is going to be the main writer of the Declaration of Sentiments. You're going to have Harriet Beecher Stowe there. Her name should seem somewhat familiar. She was the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is one of the main causes of the Civil War, because in that book she showed a lot of the true horrors of slavery. And at the Seneca Falls Convention, the women decided that together they were going to write their own Declaration of Independence, essentially. And it was based off the Declaration of Independence, but instead they called it the Declaration of Sentiments. And it wasn't just women that were there. You have 68 women that signed the Declaration of Sentiments, and 32 men, including Frederick Douglass, who was, of course, a former slave and had written his own autobiography about the horrors of slavery. And in this convention, in this Declaration of Sentiments, they basically said we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. And throughout the Declaration of Sentiments, they talk about the fact that they get taxed by the government, but they essentially have no rights or no say in how it is that they're taxed because they have no ability to vote. At this time, women didn't really have a whole lot of rights. They weren't able to own property. For the most part, men owned property, and even if they were an only child, once they got married, pretty much all of their rights went to that of their husband. So they were really trying to fight that stereotype that, women basically couldn't be just like men. And the suffrage movement is going to gain popularity as a result of the abolitionist movement, and that, of course, was the movement to abolish slavery, which we know eventually happens with the 13th Amendment. But the women's suffrage movement's going to hit a little bit of a snag, especially when the 15th Amendment gets passed. The 15th Amendment gave all men the right to vote, but left out the women. And there were some women who supported the 15th Amendment because they're like, okay, at least all men are going to get the right to vote, specifically black men. So if the women have to wait, the women have to wait. And then you had other women who were like, no, no, we shouldn't support the 15th Amendment at all because, again, it's still excluding women at the end of the day. We know, of course, that the 15th Amendment ends up getting passed, and the women are eventually going to have to continue to wait their turn. A few states had given women the right to vote. Wyoming became the first in 1869, but it would take many more years for all women in the United States to have the ability to vote. So the thing with women's suffrage is that it was difficult convincing the men that it was a good idea. The stereotypes about women, obviously existed for a reason, right? The stereotypes are that a woman's job is to cook, clean, stay at home, take care of the kids. This idea that they were going to be involved in politics just seemed absolutely absurd. And it wasn't just this idea that they were fighting of, women just need to stay home, cook, clean, and take care of the kids. There were a lot of men who felt that women represented purity, right? That they were sort of like the moral grounds, and that if they got involved in politics, politics is very dirty, there's a lot of lying, there's a lot of corruption, and if women get involved in politics, then they too are going to be corrupt. And if the women are corrupt, then there's basically no moral high road at all. That was a lot of men's arguments, is that we can't have women involved in politics because then there's just going to be no sort of moral compass whatsoever. And it seems completely ridiculous because in a lot of ways that it is, but that was really the stereotype that women were fighting. This idea that they couldn't be involved in politics and provide some type of, moral compass for the nation. And women obviously felt that they indeed could. The movement, of course, was split over how to exactly accomplish this change. There were some women who wanted a national amendment, and there were also others who wanted a state-by-state campaign. We know Wyoming gives women the right to vote in 1869, which is obviously fantastic. And you have a bunch of women who decided that they were going to go this route, this idea of a state-by-state campaign. That if we get one state to give women the right to vote, eventually it's going to become a domino effect, and all the states are eventually going to follow suit. This, of course, is a much slower process in order to adopt rights. The state-by-state campaign is also being seen by the marijuana industry today. Instead of trying to get some type of national amendment or national law to make marijuana legal, they're going state by state. And slowly but surely, several states have been legalizing marijuana, including the state of California. There were a lot of women, however, who didn't agree with this state-by-state campaign. Thought it was ridiculous that they had to wait, however many years for states to give all women the right to vote, and decided instead that it should be a national amendment. National amendment was basically set in stone. It would go across the board for the entire United States, and they just felt that that was really the best option to go because the state-by-state campaign was too slow. And it really shouldn't be a question. Women should have the right to vote, right? It shouldn't be up for discussion, really. It should be something that just happens. As a result, you're going to have an organization that ends up being created known as the National American Women's Suffrage Association, or NASA. Initially, it was the National Women's Suffrage Association that was started by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who had written the Declaration of Sentiments, declaring that all men and women were created equal. It's also going to be started by Susan B. Anthony, who becomes a very famous suffragist as well. Eventually, it becomes NASA. And NASA had really been the main organization in the United States that was fighting for women's right to vote. And initially it was created to convince both state and national governments to acknowledge women's right to vote. But NASA really took this state-by-state campaign approach. This idea that, again, if we get one state to give women the right to vote, eventually the state next to them is going to do it. It's going to domino effect, and all states throughout the United States will eventually give women the right to vote. NASA used very traditional tactics to try to get states to give them the right to vote. So they would do what we call lobbying, meaning they would go to parties where you would see senators or members of the House, and try to talk to them and convince them like, hey, you should totally sign this. You need to get on board. You need to do this. You need to do that. They would also do a lot of petitioning, getting women to sign petitions. Eventually, they would put ads in newspapers, or they would hold parades and public demonstrations and things like that in order to get more support for women's suffrage. And you can see that here in a parade that they held in 1913. You'll see NASA carrying the signatures of 1 million women who supported suffrage. And suffrage, again, is women's right to vote. But eventually, the women's suffrage movement is going to take a little bit of a turn when Alice Paul, who had joined NASA in 1912, decides to create her own party, the National Women's Party. Alice Paul was a Quaker, but she had really learned her roots in sort of fighting for equal rights when she was in Great Britain. When she was there, she had worked alongside the women's suffragists in Britain, and the women's suffragists in Britain worked very differently than NASA. These were the type of women who were going to light buildings on fire, throw rocks through windows, anything that they needed to do to basically get their cause heard. And Alice Paul grew very frustrated with NASA, kind of thought that the state-by-state campaign was ridiculous. They should be, pushing for a national amendment. And so because she got so frustrated with NASA, she went ahead and created the National Women's Party. When she did that, something's going to happen in 1917. And the United States is officially going to join World War I. And the question became this: what does the National Women's Party do? Because at this point, they had been picketing outside the White House, which, under the First Amendment of the Constitution, they absolutely have the right to do. However, they were now going to be picketing a president who was in the middle of a war. And typically, when you picket a wartime president, it doesn't look very good. It's seen as unpatriotic, as un-American, and just really quite selfish. This kind of happened a bit with the Dixie Chicks. They're a country music band, and back in the early 2000s, they were the biggest thing in music. I mean, they would be today's, Taylor Swift or Drake or whatever big music artist that you can think of. And in 2003, the United States entered a war with Iraq, and they were at a concert, and they took the microphone and said that we are ashamed that the President of the United States is from Texas. And that completely ruined their careers. People were burning their CDs in the streets. They were burning their shirts, basically talking about how un-American they were. And the Dixie Chicks, their career, it never really recovered. The same thing is going to happen with Alice Paul and the National Women's Party. They decide that even though the United States is in the middle of the war, they are going to continue to picket a wartime president. And many people saw them as unpatriotic and un-American. And how dare they talk about fighting for women's rights when you've got men who are overseas dying for their freedoms. Alice Paul is going to be jailed several times, and several women throughout the National Women's Party are going to be thrown in jail several times for picketing outside the White House. They did do so peacefully, but again, people weren't really happy about it. And while Alice Paul is in jail, she decides to go ahead and go on a hunger strike, because again, that was a tactic that she had picked up from the British women. Well, because she went on a hunger strike, right, doesn't really look good if you have a prisoner who dies because they refuse to eat. While she's in prison, she ends up getting force-fed, and one of the guards is kind enough to let her write her story to pass on to a news reporter. And eventually the story is going to run in the press, and the National Women's Party is going to gain a ton of sympathy because basically it didn't look really good to all of a sudden be force-feeding women in prison when all they really wanted was the right to vote. So you can see a couple of examples here. On the left, you have some women in prison. On the right, the women being dragged from the front of the White House. And then here was an illustration of Alice Paul being force-fed while she was in prison. And this is really going to work out for the women and the National Women's Party because eventually they're going to be given the 19th Amendment, which is going to be passed in 1920. It just celebrated its 100-year anniversary, and all women are officially going to be given the right to vote. When I was in college, I had a professor, and I mean, this was probably 8 or 9 years ago, but her husband's grandmother was 104 years old, and she was telling us that even at 104 years old, she was adamant that she be taken down to the polling station to still be able to vote, because she had said that when she wasn't born, she wasn't able to vote, and it was important that she exercise her right. And it's really important that everybody exercise their right to vote, and that they're given the right to vote. So the 19th Amendment was really a huge accomplishment for not just women, but really Americans in general, because everybody should have their voice heard, especially in elections. Some other national reform that's going to be passed as well, you're going to have the 16th Amendment. This is going to approve income tax, which means that your income can be taxed. The 17th Amendment is going to give people the opportunity to directly elect their senators. So every state has 2 senators. And of course, in California, we have Dianne Feinstein and Kamala Harris Although Kamala Harris, if Joe Biden wins in November, she will no longer be California Senator. However, if Trump wins in November, then she will continue to be California Senator. The 18th Amendment is going to start what we call prohibition, and this is the banning of alcohol. We'll talk about that topic next week. And then, of course, with the 19th Amendment, it's going to give all women the right to vote in the United States.